We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our January public monthly meeting. And we are super excited. This is the Commission on the Status of Women. And we will begin at 6:02, calling this meeting to order. And once again, welcome to everyone. I do not think at the time we have any visitors, but I am definitely going to follow our agenda. And just to give a heads up, we do have a uh, new, not new, she's been our committee chair or commission chair for a couple of, a month or two now. That is Pamela, Commissioner Rogers, as well as our chair, um, Commissioner Faulkner. And you'll see them moving forward, facilitating these meetings. But tonight I am filling in for them, so they can kind of sit back and enjoy all of the good things that we are going to do. But before I move forward with the agenda, just want to, first of all, just give another welcome to everyone and a thank you for joining us. We are definitely excited about all of the good things that the Commission on the Status of Women is doing. Some awesome things starting for 2024, which it seems like we've been in it for me 6 months, but it's not even a month yet that we've been in this year. But we're moving along, and I'm excited about all the things that we're going to do. So, following our agenda tonight, of course, we're going to at this time have a moment of silence and or meditation. All right. Thank you. And I am actually going to stop sharing the screen and really just kind of get into what we are here for tonight. Of course, this is our monthly meeting, but I try my best each time that we meet to share what the Commission on the Status of Women, all of the good things that they have so far as their programs, events, as well as some of the series that they have actually offered to the community. And tonight we are going into our second for this fiscal year, our leadership through service. Our last one, this is January, so I think it was November. We had Shemreese Diggs from Parks and Recreation, who did an awesome job, really just sharing her professionalism, her role, how she got there, and basically just kind of give an overview of what this series is about. It's just that it's getting women in different professions, whether it's medical, education, to come and actually share some of their journey, how they actually came into the profession, what are some things that helped them along the way. And so when we talk about leadership, these are women who are in leadership roles. And so it's important because some of us, if we're not in that role and we're taking steps to get there, this is an awesome way for others who have already arrived and working in it diligently to share how they got there. So tonight, she's actually not a stranger. She's been attending our meetings for almost a year now, little to a year, and really coming in on different ones. Commission on the Status of Women. She's actually come to some of these meetings. ACAD, she is a member of as of right now. And so I thought it would be a great idea. She has the feel of what we do in our meetings, but most importantly, what we stand for. So, of course, we've been talking behind the scenes and really excited about some of the things that she's going to do. And so she is going to be our guest speaker tonight. And I'm going to kind of step back and give her in a moment a chance to introduce herself. But for those that were able to attend in November, I definitely always give the opportunity for them to, kind of conduct the way they want. But I'm kind of popular right now, Shereá. Everyone wants to do the Gail and Oprah style interview. So that's what we'll be doing tonight. So we can kind of just really sit down and just kind of talk it through and see, a little bit about you and some tips and nuggets that you want to share. So I will digress and give you this moment to introduce yourself to everyone.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Shereá Burnett. I am the Executive Director of Partners Ending Homelessness in Guilford County. I assumed that position in August of last year. I am a native of Alamance County, North Carolina. I am a proud citizen of the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi Nation. And I'm proud to be with you all tonight. I did tell Liz that it's her responsibility to ensure that I am on track and that I don't go off the rails. So if I go off the rails, we have to talk to Liz about that. Okay. All right,
Absolutely.
Dr. Jones, if I go off the rails, it's not my fault. Okay. All right.
No, we're definitely, it's just us tonight. And I kind of like the atmosphere. We're really just going to really get to know you and what you do. And most importantly, just once again, sharing some of those things. So after doing this for, what is this, 24? I think we started in 22, Love. This leadership series, once again, Commissioner Katridia Martin came up with this idea. So we really, once again, just wanted to kind of present this and get a feel of how women ended up in their profession. What steps did they take? So just for a moment, share a little bit about what it is that you do, your title, and what is it that you offer to the community through your profession.
Sure. So I'm the executive director at Partners Ending Homelessness. That means that I supervise all of the staff. We are divided up into two departments. So we have the coordinated entry department and a HMIS department. HMIS is the Homeless Management Information System. And so in that department, we manage the data and the data standards for Guilford County for all of the agencies that are participating in some type of federal or state grants. So they enter clients' information, client notes, and we're able to pull reports and then give those reports to the federal government for various methods and reasons, right? And so some of you saw the announcement late last year about what the overall homelessness numbers were across the nation, right? And so those numbers came from the different efforts that COCs are doing and then what they're entering into their databases and the reports that are then subsequently run and reported to Congress. And so that's what we do. In our coordinated entry department, we do a lot of being a bridge. So trying to connect those experiencing homelessness with housing service providers, with landlords to get them housing. Unfortunately, we do not have housing funding as an agency, but we are able to complete assessments, get folks on the by name list, and then those agencies that have federal or state housing dollars pick up folks from that by name list. So we do the referrals to the list, we manage the list, and we meet with all of the agencies that are doing these assessments and that are providing these housing funds and kind of work through that list together on an ongoing basis. So as a totality, it sounds like we do two drastically different things, right? But I think what we do across the board is raise awareness. We use the data to raise awareness about what's going on. We use our assessors that are in the community to raise awareness about what's going on. And that's our way to talk to people about what we're seeing, the trends and the issues that are arising around homelessness, helps us educate the community, but it also helps us to educate agencies so that they know to be on the lookout for things that are changing, for trends that we are seeing, and for concerns that we have. So we are advocates. In fact, that's in our tagline, right? Connect, support, advocate. So we work to connect people to resources. We work to support the clients and the community and the agencies that we partner with. And then we work to advocate, not just for the people experiencing homelessness, but also for those service providers who may not always have a seat at the table when conversations are being had. But since we are the HMIS lead agency and the coordinated entry lead agency, we get to be at a lot of those tables. And we therefore try to encourage people to understand the different services that are provided in our community and give the respect due to those agencies that are doing this work.
Wow, that's a lot that you actually described. And I mean, it takes a lot of effort. Unfortunately, the homelessness within the last 5 years since COVID has hit has really hit an all-time high. And I don't think that it's a state where it is not something that's noticeable. I do know, years ago, you would see a homeless person here or there. We're not going to lie about that, but especially in major cities like LA. I have a family member who lives in LA, and they warned me about the homelessness there. And I kind of brushed it off and said, it can't be any different than anywhere else. And I was blown away when I saw how many homeless people. It's literally like a open field full of tents. And so when you look at that and look at that being as Love and I discussed a couple of months ago, something that is a hot topic that's supposed to be just that, a hot topic at that moment, but you do have things like homelessness that's still a hot topic years later, and how overwhelming it still is. How did you end up? Because of course, just by you being on point and knowing what it is that you do and what you all offer, how did you end up choosing this as a profession?
So years ago, I was a social worker in child welfare. And when I was asked that question, I always said that I did not choose the profession chose me. And I said that because I was a political science and African American studies major. I had no plans on doing anything pertaining to social work. I thought that I used to tell my friends who were social workers, like, y'all have entirely too many feelings. I just don't feel like I'm equipped for that. And so I was actually interviewing for a position with Greensboro College, and I'm still an adjunct there. And when I was interviewing for that position, the chair of the department was like, I looked at your resume and you've done so much work, like volunteer work, legal work for families and children. Have you ever considered being a social worker or going back to school for a master's in social work? And so I said, well, before I would go for a master's, I want to see what the profession is. So I applied for a position, just kind of trying to see, test my hand at it, and fell in love. So I did child welfare for 5 years, and I probably would still be in child welfare, but a common friend between Dr. Jones and I reached out to me and said, I have a housing program that needs to be updated, revived, and brought into compliance. I know that you're very type A. I know that you learn quick, and I know that you know systems. And so she brought me on board, and that was a few years ago. I got trained, brought that program into compliance. And then, of course, the gift that keeps on giving, right? I started with a rapid rehousing program. They then asked me to be over the domestic violence shelter. Then they added the homelessness prevention program and coordinated entry and a few other grants that they were operating. And I kind of just immersed myself in housing. I had always volunteered at shelters. I had always done different work in my community around homelessness, but it had not been a full part of my job. It was like a piece of what I would see in child welfare. And so from there, I've just kind of gravitated to positions that involved homelessness and housing, in part because I do enjoy systems and creating systems-based approaches to things, but also because I desire to affect change. And I think that you have to look at the common issues in a culture and in a society, and figure out what you can do to affect change in those spaces. And so for me, I offer systems, I offer the knowledge that I have, but I also offer the fact that I typically am very resourceful, and I tend to put things together, bridge things together that other people wouldn't necessarily think of. And so while I had no intentions of being a social work and being in human services field, I think that's what makes me do well in that field, because I didn't come with all of this knowledge. I just came with the systems and the basics, and I understand this equals this, and how do we get from here to here?
The system is very important to know. I have my undergrad is social work, and you and I both discussed that and how, yes, your passion is just that, helping people, and your feelings can sometimes overwhelm you, especially when you see these things. But how to approach it and how to navigate and maneuver through that is very important, because most things are systemic. And so we have to make sure that we approach on that level. So, this being your profession, this basically it choosing you, you not choosing it. And it really sometimes, not sometimes, but I know for a fact, it being very overwhelming, because you have to really, really be on point, especially with something that is ongoing. How do you take what you do on a daily basis and become, or not become, because you are a leader, but how do you balance that with making sure that everything is done, and needs are met, but still taking on that leadership role? Tell us a little bit how about what resources, or I should say, what strategies you use to stay on top of that and still remain the leader that you are.
So I think it's interesting that you asked that question. I was recently introduced to the Eisenhower matrix, right? And it breaks down where you should delegate, where you should disregard something because maybe it's not for you to do, right? So it's wonderful chart. And if you Google it, there are all different formats for it, but it kind of asks you to ask yourself 2 questions about the task or the issue, and then put it in a category. Do you delegate it to somebody else? Do you handle it? Is it actually something that doesn't need to be done? And so I add an additional component to that matrix about delaying things. So what I know about myself is I'm very type A. My to-do list is ridiculous. And so part of 2024, my agreements with myself are that I will not have these ridiculous to-do lists, right? So sometimes that means me looking at something and I feel like it has to be done right now, but does it really? Could this be delayed? And so that's one thing that I do. I also try to impart that on my staff because my staff is full of social workers, right? And they also want things done right now. And they recognize the importance of what we're doing right now. And therefore they feel like they have to fix it right now. And so sometimes that's as simple as saying, it can wait till tomorrow. I promise you it can wait till tomorrow. That also means that I have to know my boundaries and I have to enforce my boundaries. So that means that I don't typically look at my workday as ending at 5 o'clock. But I also recognize that my workday can't end at 9 p.m. every day because that's not healthy. And sometimes, you know, you go through that because you're under pressure with the job, right? So now I'm experiencing it in the opposite direction. I really love what I do. And so I would just do it all day. If I didn't have the support system or the people in my life or my own personal, you know, systems that say, Shereá, this is time to stop. I would just keep going. I think that another thing that I've had to learn is the art of surrender and the art of trust. Trusting people to do their jobs and to hold the space that they're supposed to hold, and surrendering what I cannot handle and what is not meant for me to handle. And I heard an interesting podcast, and they talked about how when you're looking at priorities or when you're looking at all the different tasks and things that are given to you, you think of it as juggling, and there's all these balls, and you have to determine what's rubber and what's glass. If it's glass, that means that if you miss it, it drops, it breaks, something shatters, something is now completely out of alignment. But if it's rubber, it's going to bounce and you can come back to it. And they said that a lot of women do themselves a disservice because we think everything is glass. And so I have to stop and pause and be like, you know what? This is actually rubber. It's okay. That ball can drop. And so giving myself grace and reminding myself that I'm human, because sometimes I forget. So we're working on that. But I think that any leader has to also trust the people that are working with them to do what they say they're going to do and to do it well and to the best of their ability. And it might look differently than how that leader would have done it, but you trust them to do what you hired them to do.
Indeed, I think that is that within itself is great. So far as that leadership and making sure that glass and that rubber, I think we're all, I know I am guilty of it, putting, because you care, you know, especially with something as delicate as homelessness. You know,
Right.
how would you balance that of this being important and this being something that you can wait? So trying to make sure that that is balanced out is very important, especially as a leader. So with that and knowing all of those things and maintaining that level of leadership, how do you take that and turn it to advocacy? How do you take your leadership and make sure that you use that to advocate what it is that you do, so far as the homelessness is concerned?
So that means advocating to the community or raising awareness and letting them know, educating folks about what we do, right? Because there's a lot of misconceptions that almost homeless service providers are doing the same thing, and we're not, right? So sometimes that looks like educating and advocating in that way. Sometimes that looks like having some really frank conversations about, I know that you really want us to do this, but that is not in the scope of our work. Please try this agency, or please partner with these folks and see if that's a better match for you. A lot of times that looks like saying who we are and who we are not, just so that everyone is on the same page. And that also means advocating for staff, right? So I don't just go into spaces recognizing I have to advocate for this client that's having this experience, but I also have to advocate and support my staff, because you made a decision and you did something and somebody might not understand why you did it. They might have 15 other ways that they feel like you should have done it. And we don't always have releases to be able to share with people why we did what we did and to run down all the facts. But what I can say is if my staff member says they did this and they did it to the best of their ability, I believe them and I'm going to advocate for them. And in this space, I'm going to stand behind them and say we did what we could do. That doesn't mean that we're perfect. Sometimes you have to take it on the chin and you have to do better the next time. But what it is, I think for us as a team is it shows that I support them and that I'm advocating for them, because sometimes they are the advocate for their client and they forget that somebody needs to advocate for them as well. And so it's a trickle down. And I try to make sure, that I communicate to them that I'm advocating for them in different spaces. And then in the reverse, I have a wonderful board of directors. And I know that in spaces that I'm not in, they advocate for me and for the agency. And so it kind of passes through in that way. And I think that that's important.
Very important. And that advocacy piece, period. I'm glad you said educate, because things are not always the same. And we've had that, it kind of relates to the quarterly meetings that we've been doing and kind of informing people, or educating, I should say, on what advocacy really is, the development of it. How do you advocate? And so you said that perfectly, because a lot of times people go into things really not knowing. Even really when it comes to something as simple as the term itself, they don't know what that means. And so I think when it comes to leadership and really advocating, that's very important. So when you take that, knowing how, of course, we know how you got into the profession, the leadership part and balancing that and advocating, if there was somebody on here tonight that really says, hey, I want to really one day be in a leadership role, and through whatever their profession may be, kind of share some tips on some things that you have done that you can share with them so far as really, really making it and getting to that point of leadership. How did you do it, and what's some things that you can share?
So I will say that I don't think everybody that is in a leadership position set out to be a leader. I know that I did not. In the same way that I did not set out to be a social worker, sometimes you have to trust the process. And the process is guiding you somewhere. And when you look at all of my experience over the last decade, this position makes perfect sense. Like when you look at all the skills that I use in this position, everything that led up to this makes perfect sense. But when I was in the midst of those seasons in my life, it did not make sense. There were some missteps, there were some mistakes, right? There was some accepting of positions and doing some work that I probably should not have done, but it informed me in a different way now. I have a different perspective now. No lesson that I learned has been wasted. No experience that I had has been wasted. But what I think people make the mistake of is thinking that leadership looks like this very clear path. And it's all arrows and it's one way. No, sometimes you're going to make a U-turn. And sometimes you're going to get off at the wrong exit. And you kind of have to be okay with that and trust that even in those mistakes, you're gaining something from it. I also think that people have to be mindful about why they want to be leaders. So for those people who do aspire, and that's what they want to do you want to be a leader because you want to be in charge? Do you want to be a leader because you've done the work so long and it's really close to retirement and you're kind of tired of, one aspect of it, so you just want to elevate to get away from it? Or do you really want to have an impact in a different way? And so for me, I feel like being an executive director does help me to have a different type of impact, right? We talked about systems, we talked about advocacy and awareness and education. I get to do that every day. But what I didn't mention is that part of me stepping into a leadership role was also about my own negative employment experiences and wanting to take the space to try to prevent other people from having those experiences. And so it was less about I want to be in charge and I want to be the director, and more of I have assessed this team. I know that they can do some phenomenal things with the correct support and the correct organization. How can I come in and assess this further, facilitate some things, add some systems, and support them through this so that they are not burnt out at the end of every single day, so that they don't come in hating to come to work. Now, granted, everybody will not love me as a supervisor. We will have difficult conversations. We will have difficult moments and struggles, and I accept that. But I also try to be all of the things that I wish supervisors had been to me, so that I can at least say, you didn't like my explanation, but at least I gave you an explanation and not just a directive. And I think that in its own way, what I've seen with staff at PEH is that as we get more comfortable with the shifts and the transitions and what we're doing and the systems we're implementing, they feel more confident in speaking about what they can and cannot do. And so it doesn't even take me advocating for them anymore. They know, like, I can say yes or no, and Shereá is going to back me up on this. And so there's a trust that's being built. There's a camaraderie that's being built. I think that to a degree, they also know that I didn't come in with this idea of being the executive director. I came in with this idea of I am joining this team. And what can we do? And so sometimes I'm on the phone talking to clients, explaining things that they couldn't grasp with other folks. Sometimes I'm going out to access points and seeing what they need and how we can better streamline things. Or sometimes I'm in the meetings with agencies to schedule access points. And what do we do about that? Just today, I have a staff member that's having some issues with a computer. And so she got all the stuff entered for one of our data reports, but she couldn't hit submit. So she sent me a text and an email, and I logged into the system and hit submit. And little things like that tend to blow people's mind if they've never had a supervisor that does that. But for me, I feel like the only way I can understand your work and respect your work is to help you do your work. And then to show you that I'm not above your work. And so I think that when we talk about leadership, we have to be mindful of our reasons for it. Those people that aren't necessarily interested in helping others in any capacity might not want to be leaders in the way that they think they are, because a lot of the work that you do, regardless of the field as a leader, is going to involve helping somebody else, training them, onboarding, helping them fill out forms. You're going to have to help people. So if you're running from helping people, leadership isn't where you go to do that. I'm a firm believer in servant leadership. And so I feel like even as leaders, you're still serving. And if you're opposed to service, you might want to reevaluate what leadership means to you and why you want leadership. I think titles are great, right? But at the end of the day, I have to be okay with what I did for that day and how I impacted those people that I interacted with, even if that title is no longer with my name. And so I can't say that it was this perfect, divine, orchestrated, plan. There weren't violins and cellos in the background guiding me this whole way. There have definitely been some mistakes and some shortcomings. But what I know in this moment is every time something comes up, I can say, that's why I went through that. Or I can tell somebody else that I'm working with, hey, don't do that. Been down that path, doesn't end well. Let's do something else. Let's try something else.
So I think out of all of that greatness that I heard, process is one thing and trusting it is what you have to do.
Yes.
And that's a part of leadership. I think that that was a lot of nuggets, and I'm appreciative for it, because I think in leadership, I can't speak for everyone else, but sometimes you just get, you look at people and you look at people in leadership and, yeah, they've arrived and you think that they are perfect, but you don't see the backstory and the behind the scenes. And,
Right.
when you work with people that close, I have the privilege of working with my director up close and personal. And so you get to see what's done behind the scenes. You get to see the phone calls. You get to see those things. And sometimes I'm like, I can do this. And then sometimes I'm like, I don't think that's the job for me. So I'm just going to move forward, But I mean, I think knowing that, you made a very valid point that it is not all a yellow brick road and it's not perfect. But, along the way, leadership, you have flaws. And I think that's important for anybody that is striving for that to know. Lastly, we talked about the homelessness. And I really want, before I go any further, correct me if I'm wrong. I hear a lot of people say unsheltered or homelessness. Is that the same? Because I always want to be correct in saying and using.
So what you have there are some different communities throughout the nation are using different words. So some people say unhoused, some people say unsheltered. Unsheltered versus sheltered really comes down to not being what people think it is. So a lot of times that is phrasing that we use when we're doing things like the point in time count. If you're unsheltered, then you're sleeping outside. If you're sheltered, that doesn't mean that you have housing. That typically means that you are in a shelter. So technically you are still homeless because you are in a homeless shelter, right? So it depends on your community and the language that they use. I tend to lean on people experiencing homelessness. And I tend to say that because homelessness is an experience. It's not all of who that person is. So you say people experiencing homelessness because you keep the people at the front, the front of your mind, the front of the phrase. But also, I think that sometimes if we were to say people experiencing homelessness and acknowledge them as that, like, yes, it's a mouthful, but there's a certain dignity that comes with that I feel like we see people all over the states You know, there's people that went out to a homeless encampment out west and opened fire and killed 2 people. We see people, you know, setting fire to things. We recently saw the videos in California of a nonprofit staff member spraying somebody with water that was on a sidewalk, right? And so to me, that underpins the whole idea of saying people experiencing homelessness, because if I highlight to you that that's a person, maybe you'll be more cognizant of how you treat them. If you lead off with them being homeless, if we all led off with our worst attribute or with what we were experiencing in this moment, do you know how people would treat us differently or see us differently? So why do they have to be homeless people? And so you have people that say houseless, unsheltered. Some people also don't like homeless because home doesn't solely define the structure where you live. For some people, family is home, friends are home. And so they are not without supports, they are without a sheltered environment. And so that's where some of that comes from as well. So there's really no like right or wrong way. I think people just have a preference.
Okay. And like I said, you know, especially with working with people, you want to say the right thing, because I know things can be different so far as the definition. And I know with disability, we have things in our community that we say and do not say wheelchair versus handicap, you know,
Right.
knowing that that's a difference. And some people think that's all the same, and it's not, you know. So I just wanted to make sure, because within the last couple of years, have heard unsheltered a lot, and I didn't know if that was, you know, the proper term, or homelessness you still could say. So thanks for the clarity. But lastly, just wanted to say with that, how can we, you know, I know this is leadership through service, but I still don't want to leave out the homeless part, you know, and what you do. So how can we as people, you know, whether it is you are in, like I said, education, government, or whatever profession that you fall under, how can we help? You know, what are some things that we can help prevent this? Uh, I say crisis because it is something that's been ongoing. So, what are some things that we can do to help, I should say, resolve um, this issue?
So I think it depends on what your skill set is and what your interests are. So if you're somebody that is interested in being a landlord or owning property, that might be considering what barriers you're putting in place for people applying for housing. Consider how your efforts to ensure the safety of your property might keep somebody outdoors. If you're somebody that's in education, and let's say you're working with elementary school children, that looks like, instead of labeling this person as having a behavioral problem, possibly, you know, having a conversation with them or their family to see if they're going through some type of transition that is making it difficult for them to get rest, or for them to get the proper, you know, structure in place. And therefore, by the time they get to school, they're aggravated. There's a poem that was shared with me by Guilford County Schools, as a young man wrote, and it's called Because I Didn't Have a Pencil. And it's about how a teacher kind of berated him in class because he didn't have a pencil. And he walked through all the things that he had to do to get himself and his siblings ready for school just to get to the building. And then he didn't happen to have a pencil. And that just was the end all be all for this particular teacher, right? I think if you're somebody that is in a community agency and maybe you're doing something like food donation or food distribution, seeing where you can partner with people experiencing homelessness. I mentioned that we have access points where we go out into the community and meet with people to do assessments. It can be beneficial in those spaces for them to kind of be set up as a one-stop shop. So somebody, as long as you get to us in that space, you can get all these different services, right? And so sometimes that looks like needing food, needing socks, some basic things. Also, if you're somebody who has extra things in your home, clothes, what have you, when you're donating, don't always look for places to donate where when people are trying to get those items, they have to pay for them. Sometimes you should consider like who partners with shelters. Are shelters accepting these things? Where can I go where they maybe do vouchers they accept vouchers from shelters. And so if I donate these clothes here, somebody can get a voucher from their shelter and purchase the clothes with the voucher if they don't have the money to do it themselves. So some of that looks like researching. And then I am also very much on a hands-on person. So I still go back to Alamance County and volunteer at Allied Churches of Alamance County because that was my introduction to homelessness as a young Girl Scout. That's still where I go to volunteer a lot of my time. And so reaching out to the shelters in your community to see ways that you can volunteer, to see how you can get involved, to see what they need. You know, sometimes it's as simple as Allied Churches has a kitchen and they needed spices. And so maybe you're not somebody who wants to serve on the food line, but you can go to the Dollar Tree and buy 20 spices and drop them off, and you still done your good deed. I think the other thing is recognizing that all of us cannot necessarily do the work to end homelessness. What we can do is support the people doing the work to end homelessness and support the people that are experiencing homelessness. And we can't discount that. So just because you donated spices, but you didn't donate a house, that doesn't mean you did nothing. You did something. So give yourself grace. And if you know people that are in landlord, property management, things like that, making sure you're talking to them about what affordability means and how they're, judging their tenants and how they're doing application approval, because some people are just doing what they know to do and not thinking about how many people they're leaving outside because of these restrictions that they have.
I think it's important thank you for that. And I think it's very important because you gave a lot of examples that are examples of help and giving that relief, as well as some examples of things that will be more systemic, that will be able to change, some policies, or like you said, if you give spices, or you may be able to give a house, any way that you can give is helpful. So I'm appreciative for every thing that you have shared with us. I call them golden nuggets tonight. And I have placed in the chat, I think we have some questions, opening up for questions, or I should say Q&A as of right now. Dr. Love, did you want to, or I can read your question? Is there data that reflects the circumstances under which people experience homelessness? Is the question.
So are we talking about what leads them into homelessness? Yes. Okay. So right now in Guilford County, so we'll run the Guilford County facts, right? In Guilford County, what we are encountering is an increased number of families that are parents with minor children. Now, some of those parents are fortunate enough to have been able to place their children with somebody that's housed, but some of them are not, and they have their children with them. And a lot of times we see them staying in hotels or staying in cars. Some of that is because somebody lost a job, and therefore couldn't pay rent. In some situations, it's also people fleeing domestic violence, and they had to weigh their options, and their option was to leave. And that is what they chose to do to keep themselves safe, but they didn't necessarily have a plan of where to go. We see a lot of people over 60, that population is growing, that are experiencing homelessness for a first time. And what they're explaining to us is foreclosure and eviction are the top two reasons that they're ending up in those spaces. We're also seeing an increased number of people between like their 30s and their 40s that have lived at home most of their lives, and their caretaker or parent is now incapacitated, deceased, or has been put in a facility. And with that removed support, to a degree, they don't really know how to navigate but so much of an adult, right? Because they've been in this environment. And so therefore, they don't necessarily have the credit. They don't necessarily have the information they need or the processes to get housing. And therefore they're homeless by default because arrangements were made for their caretaker. They now have to fend for themselves because you're over the age of 18 and society is not looking at you as a child. They're looking at you as an adult. And then we have veteran homelessness. And so I think a lot of people think that that's attributable to mental health, right? And so we hear a lot of people conflating mental health, substance abuse, and homelessness. What we don't talk about is, yes, there are people with mental health issues that sometimes come into homelessness. And there are people that have substance abuse and sometimes they end up in homelessness. But we don't talk about the people that are experiencing homelessness and that has caused mental health issues for them, or that has led to substance abuse for them because of the environments they're in. And so sometimes those things being treated as causes kind of rub me a little bit differently, because I recognize that every single person experiencing homelessness with a substance abuse issue didn't start off with that substance abuse issue. So we have to look at the timeline of how we got here and not assume what led them here.
Great question, or excuse me, thank you for that answer. I have another question they're rolling in, a question in the chat. Councilwoman Abuzawader asked, of course, we have been experiencing homelessness from other cities, and those cities have been paying their bus fare and train fare, I take it, to get here. So have you all been hearing about that? Has that been an issue with you as well?
We've been hearing it, but not as frequently as people think. And I'm going to say this in an interesting way that people might not be considering. So we sometimes hear these stories, right, of how we see people or like law enforcement from other jurisdictions bringing folks to Greensboro. And our assumption is that person was in your jurisdiction, whatever happened, and to get them away from your county, you brought them to Greensboro. What we sometimes forget is that there are some mental health and substance abuse facilities that are only in other counties. And people go there, and when their stay is up, they come back to Guilford County because this is home, even if they don't have housing. And so it's not always that they're relocating from a place. Sometimes they were already residents. I can say that we do ask people about their last zip code, and the number of people from outlier zip codes has decreased with regards to the folks that we've been talking to over the last, I'd say, 5 or 6 months. I think that people also, though, call us frequently that are in Forsyth County, like neighboring counties, and need a place to stay. And they've called everywhere there. And then they say, well, I'm willing to relocate to Greensboro if you can offer me housing. We hear that a lot. And I think we go ahead and let them know, like, you have to be in this county for a certain number of days for us to even have this conversation about coordinated entry. So we kind of redirect them to other resources in the community where they already are. But I think we get the calls more than we actually see the bodies here saying that they're from another place.
Gotcha. Okay. So last question. Well, 2 more questions. Oh, no. Wait a minute, sorry. Yeah. Does your organization have a partnership with the Family Justice Center for Women experiencing homelessness due to domestic violence?
So we partner with the Family Justice Center and with Family Service of the Piedmont. We are part of the Guilford County Continuum of Care. Both of those agencies are as well. But we also have, when I mentioned previously that we have like weekly calls with providers, Family Service of the Piedmont is on those calls, and they offer domestic violence shelter.
Okay. Okay. And I think, well, not think, we work with Family Justice Center for sure. They definitely partnered with us for our purple tree lighting every year, good organization. So yes, we're definitely familiar with that, as well as what is it, Piedmont? I always get it mixed up. Family
Service
Service
of the
of the
Piedmont.
Piedmont. I'm sorry, tongue tied, but yes, we work with both of them. So thank you for that info. And last question: what one thing you wish someone had told you on your career journey or early on in your career journey? What is one thing that you wish someone would have shared with you on your career journey?
I think what I said to you all about it's not going to be a clear one-way street with violins and cellos in the background guiding you safely to your destination. I think if I had known for the missteps, the mistakes and the missteps could happen, I would have been a lot less hard on myself when they occurred. But so many people made it appear like it was supposed to be this perfect path and this perfect trajectory. And it wasn't that. And so I wasn't prepared to document these bad experiences or these not great experiences, right, as something that would further me in my process and that would grow me and stretch me as a person. I just thought I had messed up, and now, everything is kaput because I didn't do something correctly.
Okay. And well, last question. Are there any programs or policies that other states or counties have done when it comes to addressing homelessness, housing, insecurities that you would like to see happen in Guilford County?
Not necessarily the ones that I would like to see, but I will use this moment to caution us about the ones I see that I want us to refrain from implementing. So we hear a lot about these benches in other states and in some cities throughout North Carolina that have been designed with the idea to keep people from laying on them, right? So they add an additional armrest or they add these spokes that make them very uncomfortable. I want us to be mindful about that. I recently saw on the news that a city or a municipality spent a lot of money on these rock-like structures because they had an open area space and people were putting up tents there. So they invested all these money in these rock structures to make it impossible. They put the rocks so close together that you could not put a tent up. And so what I want us to be mindful of is that a lot of those communities started off with these ordinances about the parks and the walkways in parks and people's personal belongings being in parks. And I want us to think about that, right? Because Greensboro has implemented some ordinances and High Point is going through some things with regards to encampments. And while I understand where city government and local government is coming from, I want us to, again, talk about them being people experiencing homelessness, right? And I want us to consider how much money we spend on things to prevent them setting up in a space that could have been used to house them instead. So no real laws that I'm seeing implemented. We're seeing a lot of attacks on the impoverished communities and people experiencing homelessness right now. And I know that the Human Rights Department is aware of this because we even see it once people are housed and how they're treated based on their identity, their racial makeup, you know, things like that, their culture. So I just want us to be mindful of those spaces where we are seeing what people are doing and we're saying, oh, that's horrible. I can't imagine doing that to a human being. But look where they started. Look at some of what we're doing. And if it is that horrible, and if we do want to refrain from doing it, let us keep that in mind as we're voting, as we're having conversations as local government, as we're advocating. Let's make sure that we're saying we see what we don't want to be. And let's not just go along to get along and become exactly what we said we did not want to be.
Exactly. That's an awesome point. And if there are no more questions, I thoroughly, uh, Commissioner Rogers, did you have something else that you wanted to say? Was it your hand up from earlier?
No, I'm just clapping.
Oh, it's a clap emoji. It was stuck. Okay. No, and I ditto that. It was awesome information. So much information tonight. And I am so grateful once again for Shereá Burnett coming and sharing with us for our Leadership Through Service. Yet another event that we have been able to get some, I call them, like I said, golden nuggets from you that you've shared with us. And like I said, leadership is important, but not so important that we forget to do the work, you know, and that's really what's the most important, to make sure that even within, like I said, health, education, whatever profession you're in, the work is the most important. But I do appreciate you giving guidance and definitely some tips on how to take that leadership role journey. So for those that are here, and this is our commission, so I'm so grateful everyone's here tonight, that we are able to hear all of the things that were shared. And if anything, I'm kind of boasting because she's a part of our boards and commissions, so you can see what we have on our ACAD committee. So I'm super excited once again, and thank you so much for taking out the time to be here tonight and taking the time to share all of this information. And if anything, each commission and board has a housing section. So I know that that is something that you definitely said you were, you know, ready to hit the ground and running with. And so we're looking forward to partnering up as well as this commission with, you know, the housing part. April is coming up in fair housing. So we're looking at some topics and some things to do. So we'll definitely be reaching out to you in that area, but do not want to prolong the time. We're going to go straight into our meeting. And I always tell those visitors as well as speakers, if you would like, you're more than welcome to stay on, but we're going to go ahead with our agenda and move forward. But once again, if we can just give a hand clap emoji for Shereá Burnett. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And we'll look forward to hearing from you in the future. Thank you,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
So we're going to move right on. And I'm